You're with Warwick Kearns, the founder of the Insaka e-commerce academy, and through this lesson, I want to show you what it takes to import products into South Africa. Now, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, small businesses, and big businesses that see this as a big, scary thing, and hopefully it's not slowing you down in terms of your entrepreneurial journey or getting products in that you can sell and use that to build your business. Through the course of this video, what we're going to take a look at is the process that you need to go through to import products, the costs that you need to consider, whether or not you need a freight forwarder or if you can do it yourself. And then last up, we're going to see how to apply for an import license and if you actually need one. So let's dive straight into it. This video is slightly lengthy, so if you want, just use the time bar at the bottom to scroll ahead to the numbered section that you're interested in the most. Otherwise, stick around because watching the whole video from start to finish will give you a great understanding of what it takes to import products into South Africa. So let's get into it. First up, what is the process of importing products? All right, so initially you would be engaging with a supplier that is obviously overseas, whether they're in the States or in the East, and you would need to agree on your invoice and your shipping terms before you begin the process of importing. Now, there's a couple different shipping terms, and they all come with like 3-letter acronyms that all mean fancy things. Really, the one that is most common and that your supplier will want you to use, and what I always find this easier, is what they call FOB, which is free on board. I don't know why they call it free on board, but what it means is that they will prepare the order and have it readied at their door, and then it's up to the courier to get it to you. So the other part of your agreement of the shipping terms is whether or not they're going to send it or whether or not you're going to collect it. So in the instance where they are going to send it, then they would add the cost to their invoice. So you'll see, you pay for all your products, and then at the bottom there's a line item for the cost of the courier. So they'll send that down to you. But often I've found that they actually add a bit of margin onto that, so it becomes quite expensive. It's just what they do, what I've always seen. So I would suggest rather use your own courier, and that's just a case of telling your courier that there's a parcel ready for collection, whether that's in Shenzhen, Hong Kong, San Diego, or wherever, and then you'll give them the invoice and the contact details for the supplier, and they'll take care of that. Now the courier will handle all the logistics, get it all the way through to South Africa, and you can then get a tracking number from the courier or from the supplier or whoever's doing it for you, so that you can kind of watch the progress as it moves around the world to get down to South African customs. Once it's kind of as it's entering South African customs, you do have the option to pre-clear it. So if you're using a freight forwarder, or if your courier company that you're using is on the ball, then they'll help you to pay all the taxes and clearance invoices before the product even gets here, so that when it gets here, it just takes a simple check to be released. And that is a good option because it helps to speed up the process, the delivery time that you'll take to receive the box, the parcel, the big container, hopefully. Otherwise, if you don't pre-clear it, then once it hits customs, they'll start to process it, and they will start to they'll work out all the customs duties and everything. We'll go through the costs involved later on in this video, but that needs to be paid before they release it. So the payment includes your duties and your taxes, as well as a disbursement fee, and that's about it. Yeah. So you pay the invoice, and then quite simply they deliver it to your door. Now they won't release it until that invoice is paid. So just be aware that that is the process from start to finish, and it's not actually all that complicated because the courier or your freight forwarder will guide you through that process. So that wasn't too difficult. But let's take a look at what exact costs you need to consider and you need to factor in when you're looking at planning your next courier delivery. So the first one and most obvious one is the shipping costs. And as I mentioned, the shipping costs could either be invoiced to you from your supplier as part of their invoice, or you can book your own courier partner or send your freight forwarder, ask your freight forwarder to arrange a collection, in which case you pay that bill separately. Now, the pricing of the shipping cost is going to be dependent on a couple of things. First up is the size and the weight of the product. Couriers always work on volumetric weight or heaviest weight. So now the difference there is best described if we were shipping two boxes. Let's say we've got two boxes. One is, well, they're the same size. So 1 square meter box, one is full of bricks, and the other box, which is the same size, is full of feathers. Now, the one that's full of bricks is going to be super heavy. whereas the one that's full of feathers is going to be super light. But now the couriers don't just do it on the weight, they do it on the volumetric weight or the weight, whichever one is heavier. So the volumetric weight is a number that's worked out by taking the length times height times breadth. Now that gives you, so you multiply those numbers out, then you divide it by 5,000. Once you divide it by 5,000, you get a figure which kind of looks like a kilogram amount, and that is a volumetric weight. So in the instance of the box of feathers, they wouldn't be using the actual weight because it's a very light box, but it's very bulky. So there, in that instance, they would use the volumetric weight. Whereas the box, the same size box full of bricks, the actual weight is going to be a bigger number than the volumetric weight. So the box of bricks would be charged on actual weight, and the box of feathers would be charged on volumetric weight. So that's the first thing to factor in. The second thing is the speed of delivery or the type of freight that you want to use. Are you using air freight or sea freight or combined freight? And that will obviously affect the shipping cost. Now, sending something by sea is always going to be cheaper, but you also need to figure out how does that tie in with your cash flow plans, because sending it by air, you can get it down to South Africa in 10 days max, I reckon. Whereas if you send it by sea, it can take up to 6 weeks. So you need to think about the financial saving of the shipping costs and factor in the other expenses of having your cash flow tied up in that stock for so long. Now, there is also a middle ground where you can choose to air freight it from the east to Dubai and then sea freight it down the side of Africa down to SA. And that works out kind of in the middle, where it's not as expensive as air freighting it the whole way, and it doesn't take as long as sea freighting it the whole way. So the type of freight that you're going to be using is also important. And I suppose the last thing that you need to also consider here is if you are shipping dangerous goods, sometimes that comes with extra costs. So that is what is involved in the shipping cost. The next up is a pretty straightforward one called the disbursement fee, which is normally just a straight up flat handling fee. On small items or on reasonable size imports, that's going to be 150 Rand. On bigger, bulky, or dangerous items, then that can be bigger. But generally, it's a negligible figure, but it's on the invoice, so you got to factor that in. Then next up is the import duties, which is one that always is an interesting one for discussion. The way you find out your import duties is firstly by understanding or finding out the HS tariff code of each product that's in the shipment. So every product around the world has a HS tariff code, and you just need to find out the correct one for your products. You can get that from the supplier, or you can Google it. Better to get it from the supplier because they'll give you the correct thing. You don't want to use the wrong code because you could end up kind of getting the wrong number, because a duty is assigned to each and every code, and that then tells you what your duty is going to be. Now, below this video, you'll find a link to a blog post which includes the SARS document, the South African Revenue Service document, which gives you a breakdown of all the different HS tariff codes and the South African import duties. So if you can get the HS tariff code from the supplier and then go to that document on our blog, then you'll be able to kind of find out you can find out exactly what your duty is going to be, dependent on the product that you're importing. And it's important to know that, because in case if you're sitting there saying, oh, what are import duties? You know, I've heard of this, but I don't know exactly what it is. It's a duty that is applied when you import a product. Now, in my opinion, a duty is a nice word for it. I think that it's more of a penalty, because the way that the South African government looks at it is if the product that you're importing could have been made in South Africa, then they're going to give you a duty. They're going to apply a higher duty on it when you import it. So for high-end electronic products that, you know, South Africa, we're not set up for that. So it's not likely that we would have made that product. For those items, the import duty is very low, sometimes 0%, sometimes 7.5%, depending on what it is. But for items that can be made in South Africa, like let's say clothing and woven baskets and I don't know, other things, wooden artwork, things that are made in South Africa and can be made in South Africa, if you're importing it, that is taking away work and jobs from South Africans. So the duty applies. So in my opinion, I see this more as a penalty. You know, they're penalizing you for supporting international suppliers rather than South African suppliers. But they don't call it that. They call it an import duty. And really, for me, it's a penalty. So that's kind of, if you are thinking about it logically and you're trying to say, or gauge what your import duty would be, just think like, could that product have been sourced or made locally? If yes, you're going to get a high import duty. Like clothing, geez, the import duties are up to 45%. So, when I say your import duty could be 45%, it's very important that you understand what that number is before you start thinking about importing products. Because if your product has a margin of 40% and now your import duty is 45%, you're making a loss before you even start selling your product. So very important to understand this. A little air asterisk that I'm going to add here for you guys is that some items on the SARS document will give you a percentage. Let's say the SARS document says that the customs duties on an item is 7%, but sometimes that can be affected where the source of the product is. So there's a EU-Africa trade agreement that often brings that down. So if you're importing from EU, that could mean that your duty is waived or reduced. So if that is the case, then still go and get the HS tariff code, find out what SARS says the duty is. Then if you are importing from the EU, you can also try and investigate whether that falls within the EU-Africa trade agreement, and perhaps you're going to get lucky and that's going to be reduced down, hopefully to zero. That would be a great result. Now, a little side note here is just really be sure that you use the right code, because if you use the wrong code, or your courier or your freight forwarder partner just uses the wrong code, then you could end up paying more, which is very difficult to claim back. Or what could happen is that you end up scoring and you're paying less, which sounds like a great idea, right? But SARS have up to 5 years to roll back any previous invoices. So if you are purposefully or mistakenly paying too little on your import duties and you're seeing that as profits on your business bottom line for years and years, SARS could come knocking on your door 5 years later and say, actually, we would like to invoice you, or we are invoicing you for all the incorrect or below paid duties over the last 5 years. So if you get that wrong, and if you haven't accounted for that, then you could be in big trouble. So just make sure that you get it right up front. And the other thing is, never ever underclare your invoices, underdeclare, because sometimes your suppliers think that they're doing you a favor, and your supplier who you've built a nice relationship with, they offer to say, well, the order value that we've agreed on, let's say it's 200,000 Rand. Now, you've paid the supplier 200,000 Rand or the dollar equivalent, and sometimes they'll offer to undervalue the invoice that goes along with the paperwork. So every order that goes around the world has to have a copy of the invoice and all the documents on the outside of the box, and also on the inside of the box. But what your suppliers will sometimes offer to do is they will recreate a new lower invoice, which means that when you get billed for the customs duties, you'll only be invoiced at the lower amount. So let's say your invoice was legitimately 200,000 Rand. They issue a new invoice for 50,000 Rand. So now your duties and everything is worked out in that amount, which seems like a really great idea. And it's very tempting. But obviously, we don't want to break the law. But secondly, if they pick up on that once, if they catch you once, every single import that you ever do into the future will be red flagged, slowed down, checked and rechecked, and it's just a nightmare. For the rest of the time, they won't trust you. Your import license, your company details will be red flagged, your personal ID number will be red flagged, and it's just something that you don't want to have happen. So while that can be very tempting to underdeclare an invoice, not only is it illegal, it's also going to stitch you up if they ever catch you. So let me just kind of leave that there as a warning. Do with it as you like. Then last up, in terms of the duties or the costs that are involved, is we've got VAT, but it's not just regular VAT. It's what they call ad valorem VAT. I'm not exactly sure the science behind this, but the fact is that they charge you 10% above the value of the import and then add the 15% VAT. So if the actual value of the import is 100,000 Rand, they'll firstly add 10% to the value, and then they'll add 15% VAT. So they work on the ad valorem VAT is based on the ATV, the added tax value. And again, I'm not entirely sure why they do this, but it's just how they work it. So when you are running your numbers, when you're figuring out what your landing cost is going to be, what your margin is going to be, what your profit's going to be, then don't forget that the ad valorem VAT is increased. So the value is increased by 10% to get to the added tax value. Then they add 15% VAT on top of the added tax value. Now, your VAT is reclaimable if you are VAT registered, so that's not the end of the world. But just be very aware of that. And then my last note on this topic is that if you are importing products from neighboring the BLNS countries, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Swaziland, the 10% isn't added. So you just get the VAT added. And honestly, I actually don't know the science or the history behind all of this, but that is how it's worked out. So these in front of you on the screen, that's your cost that you need to consider when you're importing. And let's go into the next section, which is about whether or not you need a freight forwarder. Because if you're thinking about costs, we're obviously trying to keep our costs down. But what I'm suggesting, or what a lot of companies do, is they have a freight forwarding company. Now that's going to increase your cost because you can do it yourself. So you can legitimately just arrange these couriers yourself. You can do it by, once you've agreed on that, the invoice with your supplier, and they say that the goods are ready for shipment, you can just phone up DHL and say, DHL, please go and collect this for me. And they'll do it and they'll take care of it. DHL will act as your clearing agent through customs. They'll help you to pay it. They'll deliver to your door. Happy days. But where I strongly suggest, or why I strongly suggest you do use a freight forwarder, is because even though there is an added expense on this, there's two angles to the cost, because the freight forwarders work very closely with the couriers or with the logistics partners. And so the invoice or the quote that you would get by phoning DHL directly, they're obviously going to get a way cheaper cost, and they pass it on to you. But now on top of the lower cost is their service fees. So in essence, from my background, from my history, I've always seen it works out to 5 to 10% more expensive than having done it myself. But here's the real value of using a freight forwarder. First up, they're going to take care of all the admin, which is a dream, because there's a fair amount of admin in terms of the paperwork going back and forth. And let me add a little note here. Always save all the paperwork. Any paperwork that comes with the delivery, any paperwork that you receive during the process, your invoices and everything. My suggestion is create a file on Dropbox or in Google Drive and just scan all the documents, any emails you receive, put them in there into a particular folder per import, because SARS and the bank and a whole bunch of people can ask you for those documents up to years later. And if you don't have it, it's a nightmare. I've been through that myself, where they say, can I get some documents from an import you did 2.5 years ago? And and they don't the answer that they don't accept is, sorry, I don't keep records. So a little kind of tip bit there. Create a cloud-based document or folder for every single import you do and save every item of documentation into that so that you can reference it later on. But getting back to my point about admin, the freight forwarders help to reduce your admin. They take care of it all for you. They have relationships with the clearing customs agents, and they can help to clear it through customs quicker. But the real value comes when something goes wrong. Now, if you are importing a product or a big container load or a little box and something goes wrong, you're now on the phone to DHL saying, why hasn't my shipment moved in the last couple of days? And unfortunately, as much as the service that they offer you is fantastic, they've got a lot going on and they don't prioritize your little shipment that's somewhere around the world. Now, if your freight forwarder, on the other hand, is doing that for you, they will go and light fires and kick butts and do whatever is needed to get your product, your parcel released from wherever it is, and move through the system so that your delivery can happen. Now, where that becomes super critical is in the very busiest times of the year, when you get close to festive season, when you get close to Black Friday, Christmas, Father's Day, any of the seasonality sales, like the customs ports get so chock-a-block full of products. Everybody's trying to import their products. Like if you think about the amount of importing of items happens for the big retailers around the country, they all doing the importing leading in like October, November, early December. They're just importing, and they got massive things going through. They've definitely got freight forwarders handling the process for you. And then you've got a couple of little boxes that are moving alongside this, and your boxes could get kicked under a shelf or left on the side or down prioritized or delayed for whatever reason. And when you phone up your courier, they've got so much going on because now it's the busiest time of the year. They definitely can't handle it. They've never been able to handle it. And if they ever can, I'll be impressed, because they just aren't scalable for that type of volume. But now your freight forwarder partner will go in and get your products released. And I have had it happen where we've gone through a Christmas without having the items, like our best-selling items, are all sitting in customs. Now, if you've invested all your money into stock and you don't get it through Christmas, that if your business isn't financially strong, it can ruin you. And I mean, I'm sure you can understand that would be a bad situation if you get through to Christmas or to the busiest time of year, whatever your seasonality is, and you don't have any inventory. Now, having a freight forwarder will not 100% make sure that that never happens, but it'll greatly reduce the chance of that ever happening. And when the cost is just 5 to 10% more, I'll pay it every single time, because I don't want to deal with the admin, and I definitely want my stock to arrive at my door as quick as humanly possible. And I'd advise that my advice to you is also go ahead and get a freight forwarder, because they'll make it easier. They'll take care of it. They reduce the risk of delays, and getting your products available quicker means that you can sell it quicker, release cash flow, turn profit, buy more stock, sell it again, flip that stock, and it's just a good result. So that's kind of a suggestion from me to you. Use it or don't use it, but I think it's a good idea. So last up for this little training video in terms of how to import into South Africa, let's take a look at what needs to be done in order to get an importing license for importing products into the country. So first up, I want to tell you that if you're thinking about if you're starting a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're just getting into importing, I'll give you a tip that you actually don't need a license to import products into South Africa. But there is a code that you can use. So when you order your products, you say, my import code for now is 70, do that 5 times. So 70 times 5. And they'll allow your business to import stuff. You can do up to 4 imports in a year to a max value of 50,000 Rand. So if you're just getting started, like don't delay, don't wait for your import license. Don't think, this importing thing is such a disaster. How am I ever going to do it? Just go ahead and place your order overseas, get your courier to pick it up and say, my import license is the number that you see on the screen in front of you. And you can start. So that gets you into the game. Now, if you are going to be doing this long term, then I certainly advise, and you absolutely do need a license. And in order to apply for one, there's a lot of companies that are offering this as a service that you should pay them to go and apply for you, but it doesn't cost anything. You can do it. It's completely free. And all you need to just do is get the required documents, complete it, and hand it in. And the turnaround time is about 2 to 3 weeks. It's very easy. It's super easy. So there's a whole list of documents that you do need. Again, there's a link below to a blog post on our site, which will take you through what you need. There's a few government documents, and all the normal stuff, your proof of banking details, proof of address, ID of director, a letterhead, and so on and so forth. So click the link below. It'll not only give you the list of docs that you do need, it also gives you the PDF downloads of the documents that you require. Then you just go through to your local offices. Now, not all SARS offices have the application ability. So there's a link in the blog to show you which offices you can go to. In Joburg, I know Germiston and OR Tambo have their SARS offices can issue, or you can apply there. The OR Tambo one is a disaster, so definitely go with Germiston. From what I've heard, the Pretoria offices are really good, and the Maritzburg ones, I've had people that have had it happen there pretty quickly. So that's pretty simple. And the link will also give you the list of other offices that you can go to around South Africa to apply for your license. And really, that is how easy it is. You just go there, hand it in. 3 weeks later, you'll get an email, firstly, with a letter confirming your account. And then they also send you a printed signed copy in the post. And as we know, the post is a post, so you never know when you're going to get it. And that reminds me, something I wanted to mention is, if you're importing and your supplier is suggesting that you use the postal service, then definitely do not do that, because it'll take you a long time to get your goods. Now, they might not say we're going to use a postal service. What could happen is that your supplier says they'll send it using UPS, which is United States Postal Service, USPS, United States Postal Service. Now, when US Postal Service bring it down to South Africa, where they hand it over, that then gets handed over to SAPS, which you don't want happening. And the Chinese, or the Eastern version of that, their local one is called EMS. I don't know what that stands for, but EMS deliveries are handed into the SAPS offices, and then you've got to go down that journey, stand in their queues, give their tracking numbers, hopefully they find it, hopefully they deliver it, and so on and so on. If you are importing, don't do the post office. If you're trying to build a business around this, don't use a post office. If you're trying to do drop shipping, I'm sorry to tell you, you can't use a post office. You can't rely on that. You have to use couriers, which then you need to make sure your numbers stack so that you can make a profit. Anyway, the dropshipping thing is a whole nother lesson. In fact, we've got some free training. No, we don't. It's not free. We've got some training on that that you can go into if you do want to get your dropshipping right. But this lesson has been absolutely free. I hope it's been of value to you. Now, I do want to continue the conversation, so get in touch with me and Insaka, and get in touch with us on Facebook. If you go to Facebook, search for the Insaka e-commerce community. It's the biggest e-commerce environment in South Africa, or biggest e-commerce community in South Africa, with hundreds of e-commerce entrepreneurs helping one another to grow our sales and grow e-commerce overall. Otherwise, the insaka.co.za website has blogs, and our YouTube channel has tons of free content, more stuff on importing, more stuff on e-commerce, more stuff on growing your sales. So definitely check it out. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you inside one of those multiple groups or the Facebook channels. And I'll chat to you inside there. Cheers for now.